Next we have Jacinta Beehner and Tora Bergman on the AI forest using deep learning to track wild monkeys.
All right. And as soon as the projector comes back on, there we go.
Thank you. How do I advance slides? This one here. Awesome. Thanks. All right. All right, thanks for the chance to introduce our idea to use machine learning to monitor animal movement. So it's going to be kind of a different shift from the last talk. My name's Jacinta Beehner, and I'm in psychology and anthropology. And along with my collaborators, Dr. Tori Bergman and Dr. Ambuj Tiwari, who you just heard, we're really excited to build what we're calling the AI forest. So animal movement has captured scientists for centuries, especially in the fields of ecology and evolution. So we need to answer compelling questions related to how they forage and get food, predator escape, how they integrate into social networks, and the transmission of diseases. Measuring animal movement at really large scales, so across the globe, but also at smaller scales among individual animals is really an expanding field that's come to be known as movement ecology. So technology's helped us explore so many more questions than we could before, especially for some of the theoretical and applied areas that are outlined on this slide, including collective animal movement, life history, ecosystem services, and this includes things like seed dispersal, social behavior, and this is where my focus lies, and I'll come to an example of this in a bit, conservation behavior, such as the use of wildlife corridors, and also services that piggyback on movement technology. So things like ecophysiological measures that can include heart rate, sometimes blood pressure. So what is this technology that we're using? Well, until relatively recently, it's been just our ability to track animals themselves was fairly limited, and it was pretty much dominated by what we call the boots on the ground approach. So essentially a person had to have a GPS unit and they would walk with the animal that they wanted the track from, or they would walk with the group that they wanted the track from. So of course this means that we need as many people with GPS units as we need tracks. Obviously, this method's extremely labor intensive. It's only possible when humans can move along the same landscape as the animals, and it's just not very effective for measuring the simultaneous movement of dozens of animals or dozens of groups across time. So the question that we can answer with this form of movement data are fairly limited. Drone technologies helped us hugely. So the combination of using a drone with appropriate tracking software now allows us to simultaneously track multiple individuals across a landscape. So maybe we can follow individual wildebeest as they move in the herd in order to understand maybe whether one might associate more with some individuals in the group than they do with others. But as you can see from this photograph, the method's limited to animals who live in open landscapes. They constantly have to be visible. So important for this talk, this method loses individuals who are temporarily under a tree cover, or when they go to bed for the night, the method is unable to track the same individual from one day to the next. So if we do want to track an individual animal across the landscape, we have to fit the animal with on-animal sensors. This can include radio collars, GPS collars, or RFID tags. And these are great because they really do allow us to track a specific individual at a very fine scale, also a very broad scale, across the landscape. But this method also has a whole bunch of limitations. First, it's really disruptive. So each animal has to be captured, and in most cases anesthetized, in order to be fitted with these collars or these tags. And in lots of these cases, this undoes the habituation that we've taken years to basically train our animals to ignore us. So we really do want our animals not to pay attention to us, and if we've recently darted them, they remember this. So The best technology for tracking individual animals turns out to be the worst one for researchers who need to not be seen as a threat to their animals. As you can see from this photo, these collars are not exactly small. So we're not always sure about the effects of carrying around these collars on their own behavior and biology. Second, these collars and tags are temporary. So for the GPS collars, batteries die, and for RFID tags, animals die. So you can put solar panels on collars, and this does extend their life somewhat, but it makes the batteries even larger. So it amplifies the problem related to carrying around a GPS collar. Third, the GPS collars themselves are extremely expensive, on the order of $1,000 to $2,000 each, and they're often very difficult to recover from animals once you need to change the batteries. RFID tags solve some of these problems. They're inexpensive, and they're small, and they don't rely on a battery. But they do require an external reader. And so in order to read where the animals are at a given time, you either need to attract them to a reader with a food source or a salt lick or something of that nature, which is somewhat invasive, or you need to be integrated into a satellite system, which isn't always available for smaller projects. So in other words, developing on-animal sensors is way more invasive than we would like. Now, perhaps illustrating these limitations, the best data set to date, this is from 2015, but it's still true, it's the best data set on movement in a wild primate. And it comes from a group of baboons, this isn't my own work, where every baboon in one single group was collared for 2 weeks, and a fix was taken every minute. Because a fix was taken so often, the batteries died after 2 weeks. They knew this would happen, but essentially that was the benefit of getting, the benefit was that they got a fix every minute. Yet this data set yielded a number of really cool insights. It led to 2 papers published in Science and a number of other longer format papers published in other top journals. So here's just a summary of one of these insights into the democratic leadership of baboons, where apparently baboons follow the pack and they don't just follow the leader. But to get back to the limitations of these data sets, it's not hard to see that collar and tag technology are just inherently limited. Improvements aren't going to help biologists like me study taxa that are impossible or unethical to capture and to fit with on-animal sensors. So rather than outfit the animals with technology, we will outfit the forest. We envision a landscape that's going to use artificial intelligence to do the heavy lifting for us. So we propose a somewhat novel method that uses machine learning to track individually identified animals across a landscape that relies on no invasive technology whatsoever. So instead, we're going to place a grid of remote sensors across the forest that will identify individual animals as they pass by each sensor. So when our batteries die, we can walk up to the tree and replace the battery. Okay, so how do we get our remote sensors to identify individual animals? Well, the sensors themselves are old news. Camera traps have long been used to visually capture the animals that pass by, and similarly, passive acoustic recorders are also gaining increasing popularity in capturing animals by using their vocalizations. Also, increasingly, researchers are adding machine learning to use these technologies. So there's loads of apps now that use visual technology to identify organisms at the species level. So for example, the app, picture this, has you take a photo of a plant, and in a few seconds, it tells you what species it is. Similarly, many of us are familiar with the Merlin Bird ID app. And if you hear a bird singing, you open the app, record the song, and the app will let you know what species of bird is singing. So all this is super cool. But this isn't individual identification. This is at the species level only. And this is where I kept running into walls with machine learning technology. Mostly off-the-shelf kinds of things identify species. I don't need an app to tell me what species I study. So my problem, which is actually the problem of many behavioral ecologists studying individual animals that live in the wild, is that is can we get these remote sensors to recognize specific individuals? So I study the white-faced capuchin monkey. These monkeys are found throughout Central America and in the northern part of Colombia in South America. The monkeys are really small. They're like the size of a cat, so GPS collars are not all that useful. They live under a very thick canopy, so drone tracking is also impossible. They're mostly high up in the trees, which makes darting very dangerous and possibly unethical. And they're highly intelligent, really intelligent. So they're going to remember if you capture one of their friends and put a GPS collar on them. So none of the current technologies for tracking their movements are going to work for us. Also, I'm studying these animals at the level of the individual. Oops. Oh, sorry, my slides are in the wrong order. I'm going to flip. That's all right, I did this. So remote sensing at the species level isn't all that helpful. So one of the most important aspects of our research is to follow the soap opera of these monkeys on their day-to-day lives. We're interested in why some individuals are more successful at survival and reproduction than other individuals. And this requires us to understand, say, why Polito, here at the lower left, he's 26 years old, he's the former alpha male, he used to be in the neighboring group. Why is he more successful than Pio, down here on the lower right, 11 years old, rising in rank, who also used to be in a neighboring group? So if we can't track these individuals, then the technology is fairly useless to us. And to reiterate, this isn't just a problem unique to us. The approach that most of the field of behavioral ecologists use is to follow individual animals across their lives. So why are we the ones to develop this method? And now back to this one. We have a perfect system for this. We have a small, bounded forest, and we need to follow individuals that can't be followed with other technologies. So here's our forest. It's a small, tractable forest in Costa Rica called the Taboga Forest Reserve. It's 4 kilometers by 2 kilometers, and it's bounded by sugarcane. So it's entirely reasonable that we can build a grid of sensors across the entire forest and keep track of every single monkey within it. We currently know 60 individuals across 4 groups, and that's indicated by the colored polygons on this photo. We've censused the whole forest, and we did find that there's heavily overlapping ranges for about 12 different groups. So in theory, we could know all individuals in the forest once this technology is in place. Okay. Okay. We've already had some success using facial recognition to individually identify our monkeys. So here's one of our platforms where we conduct cognitive experiments with 2 of our monkeys, Popeye and Perry. And the camera picks up on their faces, and we can identify them with a pretty high degree of accuracy. It's hard to see, but if you look right above the box, you can see their name, and then the % confidence level is indicated. But the visual information's pretty limited because the monkeys have to come to a platform in order for their face to be picked up by the camera traps. And only the brave animals come down to the platforms. So visual information is just inherently less available in a closed system. So if only there were a sensory modality that could be detected at a distance. Well, enter vocalizations. So this is kind of the crux of our project. So our capuchins are extremely vocal, and many animals are extremely vocal. And not only are they vocal, but these vocalizations have individual signatures. So Popeye's vocal signature is different from Pio's individual signature. So the same way that we can recognize the voices of one another, even without a lot of exposure, the monkeys recognize the voices of their fellow monkeys, and presumably a program can recognize the individual voices of the monkeys. So every single time scientists have looked for individual signatures, they've found individual signatures in monkey vocalizations. And this totally makes sense for a social animal who depends heavily on individual identification in a closed habitat, which is what most primates live in. So this brings us to why our project is the place to develop this technology. One of our primary research programs for the past 4 years has involved collecting capuchin vocalizations from known individuals and labeling them accordingly. So we have this library of over about 4,000 vocalizations from known individuals that we can use as training data for a machine learning algorithm. And there's not too many other behavioral ecology projects with this type of data set. All right, so let's put these pieces together. Well, first we set up all of our passive acoustic monitors in a grid of beacons across the forest, and these would be the green dots. Each beacon's about 200 meters apart, and this is the distance that capuchin vocalizations, can be detected at. We'll build an algorithm that learns individual voices for our animals, and this is the step we're on now. We're currently working with Megan Daly in the Advanced Research Computing and Peter Knoop at Michigan IT to develop this a little bit more. Once it's deployed, we envision that this is what the system will look like. So, for example, Tallulah in the Tenori group on the pink side, she gives a peep at this beacon, and it's detected at a certain date and time. And Pio in the Palmas group gives a peep, and it's detected at this beacon. And again, it marks his arrival. Yep, sorry. Okay, a few minutes later, so basically, if we move it along, we can basically do a vector diagram of each animal as they move about the forest. Okay. So we've already identified lots of reasons why this forest is good. Small tractable, infrastructure, bounded system, and we have a vocal library. Okay, and the thing that we're really interested in is these intergroup encounters. So one group encounters another, one goes off one way, one goes off another. I could go on, and maybe if you have questions about the kinds of applications that we could apply these to, you can ask me after. But there are many applications for such a system. Okay, social networks is one, and especially if we can get the system to learn all individuals, then we can simultaneously track movement between groups, between individuals, and do this kind of social network analysis. Of course, we can also apply it to other animals with vocal systems and individual signatures. I apologize for rushing through the end, but I really thank you for your attention.